People with this neurological profile need routine to function, yet struggle to maintain consistent routines. They crave deep focus, but find themselves constantly distracted. They desperately want social connection, but social situations exhaust them within minutes. This describes the experience of living with a brain that's perpetually at odds with itself, what researchers have increasingly recognized over the past decade as having both ADHD and autism simultaneously. The internal experience isn't just confusing. It creates competing neurological demands that can lead to significant daily functioning challenges. Hey there, neurospicy folks! I'm Dr. Monty, and I'm an AuDHD psychologist with a special interest in all things neurodivergent neuroscience. If you enjoy my videos, please consider subscribing to my channel to help me grow and bring more scientific understanding and awareness to a larger audience. Thanks so much! For decades, the psychiatric establishment made it extremely difficult to diagnose both ADHD and autism in the same person. The DSM-IV actually prohibited dual diagnosis entirely, operating under the assumption that if someone was autistic and showed ADHD-like symptoms, those symptoms were simply part of their autism, not a separate condition. This made intuitive sense to many clinicians because the two conditions seem to have fundamentally opposing characteristics. Consider the textbook presentations. Autism involves a preference for routine, predictability, and sameness. People with autism often have intense, sustained focus on their special interests and can become distressed when their routines are disrupted. ADHD, on the other hand, is characterized by distractibility, impulsivity, and novelty seeking. People with ADHD get bored with routine, struggle to maintain attention on tasks that don't immediately captivate them, and often act on impulse without considering consequences. These seemed like opposite ends of a spectrum. How could someone simultaneously crave routine and be unable to maintain it? How could someone both hyper-focus intensely and be constantly distracted? The clinical picture appeared contradictory, so the field chose to see it as impossible rather than complex. However, this framework overlooked a crucial factor. The lived experience of neurodivergent individuals often doesn't align with rigid diagnostic categories. Increasingly, both clinicians and the people they were trying to help began recognizing that this either-or approach was leaving a huge population unserved. People were describing experiences that didn't fit neatly into either box, experiences that seemed to involve both patterns simultaneously, creating something qualitatively different from either condition alone. The community developed a term for this, AuDHD, pronounced AuDHD, describing the lived experience of having both autism and ADHD. And the numbers were substantial. A 2019 meta-analysis by Wrong and colleagues published in Frontiers in Psychiatry found that between 50 and 70% of autistic individuals also meet criteria for ADHD. A separate systematic review by Antshall and colleagues, published in Clinical Child and Family Psychology Review in 2013, found that 30 to 80% of autistic children showed clinically significant ADHD symptoms. Similarly, research from the University of California, San Francisco, and other institutions suggests that 20 to 50% of people with ADHD also show significant autistic traits, though the research on this direction is less extensive. When the DSM-IV was published in 2013, it finally acknowledged what had been obvious to many. These conditions could, and frequently did, co-occur. But what the diagnostic manual still doesn't capture is how these two neurological patterns interact when they exist in the same brain. This isn't simply autism plus ADHD. It's something entirely different. To understand what's happening, think of your brain as having two different operating systems running simultaneously, each with its own priorities and strategies for navigating the world. The autism operating system is like a highly specialized server. It wants to run deep, complex processes with minimal interruption. It values consistency, predictability, and thorough analysis. It's designed for sustained, intensive work on subjects of high interest, and it functions best when external variables are controlled and predictable. The ADHD operating system, meanwhile, is like a smartphone, constantly scanning for notifications. It's designed for rapid task switching, novelty detection, and quick responses to environmental changes. It gets bored easily, seeks stimulation, and thrives on variety and spontaneity. Where the autism system wants to go deep, the ADHD system wants to go wide. Where autism seeks sameness, ADHD seeks difference. Now imagine both systems trying to control the same brain simultaneously. The autism system initiates a deep focus session on a special interest, let's say researching the migration patterns of Arctic terns. Someone could happily spend 8 hours reading research papers, taking detailed notes, creating elaborate cross-reference systems. But 3 hours in, the ADHD system starts sending alerts. This is boring now. We've been sitting too long. Look, there's a notification on your phone. Oh, and remember that thing you were supposed to do yesterday? The autism system resists. No, we're not done with this yet. We need to understand the complete picture. Interrupting now will disrupt the entire process. But the ADHD system is persistent. But there are so many other interesting things we could be exploring. What if we're missing something important happening right now? This creates what researchers describe as internal contradictions, simultaneous competing drives that can't both be satisfied. The person wants routine, but finds routines insufferably boring. They need predictability, but crave novelty. They want to organize their environment perfectly, but can't maintain organizational systems. Researchers studying this phenomenon have noted that people with both conditions often experience what's been called trait interference, where the two conditions don't just coexist, but actively work against each other. The ADHD impulsivity might lead someone to make spontaneous plans that their autistic need for routine finds deeply distressing. The autistic preference for completing tasks thoroughly conflicts with ADHD's tendency to jump between projects. The complexity deepens when we consider that sometimes the traits don't conflict. They amplify each other in unexpected ways. Both conditions involve differences in executive function, the brain's management system for planning, organizing, and executing tasks. When both are present, these difficulties can compound. Both involve sensory processing differences, emotional dysregulation, and challenges with social communication. In these areas, having both conditions doesn't create internal conflict, it creates intensification. Research has found that people with both autism and ADHD show more severe executive function deficits than people with either condition alone. They also tend to have more intense sensory sensitivities and greater challenges with emotional regulation. It's as if the brain is running two different programs that both happen to have bugs in the same areas, creating system crashes that are more frequent and more severe than either program would produce alone. The research picture on AuDHD is still developing, and there are significant gaps in our understanding. Most studies have focused on children, and we know much less about how these conditions interact in adult brains. There is also a significant gender bias in the research. Autism and ADHD have historically been studied primarily in boys and men, even though we now know both conditions present differently in girls and women. Recent research has highlighted another complication: masking. Many people, particularly women and girls, develop sophisticated strategies to camouflage their autistic and ADHD traits. Someone might appear to be functioning well socially and academically, while internally experiencing constant overwhelm from trying to suppress their natural responses and mirror neurotypical behavior. When both autism and ADHD are present, the cognitive load of masking becomes even more intense because there are more traits to suppress and more internal contradictions to manage. The diagnostic process itself presents challenges. Many clinicians are still not well versed in recognizing co-occurring autism and ADHD, particularly in adults. The traits can mask each other. Someone's autism might make them appear less hyperactive than typical ADHD presentations, while their ADHD might make them seem less rigidly routine-focused than typical autism presentations. This can lead to misdiagnoses, partial diagnoses, or misdiagnoses. There's also the question of whether what we're calling AuDHD represents two distinct conditions, or whether we're looking at a single, more complex neurodevelopmental pattern that our current diagnostic categories aren't equipped to capture. Some researchers, including Dr. Uta Frith at University College London, have suggested that the high co-occurrence rates might indicate that autism and ADHD exist on connected spectrums rather than as separate conditions. The treatment landscape is equally complex. Most interventions are designed for either autism or ADHD, not both. ADHD medications might help with attention and impulsivity, but could potentially increase anxiety or sensory sensitivities that are already heightened by autism. Behavioral interventions designed for autism might emphasize routine and structure in ways that feel restrictive to someone whose ADHD brain craves novelty and flexibility. And then there are the individual differences. Not everyone with both conditions experiences the same internal conflicts. Some people find that their autism and ADHD traits complement each other. Their autistic attention to detail might help them notice things their ADHD brain would otherwise miss, or their ADHD creativity might help them find novel approaches to their autistic special interests. The experience of AuDHD isn't uniform, and we're still learning about the factors that influence whether the conditions conflict, complement, or amplify each other. If you recognize yourself in this description, the first thing to understand is that your internal contradictions aren't character flaws or failures of willpower. You're not broken or inconsistent. You're managing two different neurological patterns that have different needs and priorities. The exhaustion you might feel from constantly negotiating between competing drives is real and valid. Understanding this can actually be liberating. Instead of seeing yourself as failing at being either properly organized or properly spontaneous, you can recognize that you're successfully managing a complex internal system. The person who spends 3 hours organizing their bookshelf by topic, author, and publication date, then abandons the project halfway through because they got distracted by an interesting passage, that's not inconsistency. That's autism and ADHD each doing what they do. This understanding can also help you develop more effective strategies. Instead of trying to force yourself into purely autistic or purely ADHD approaches, you can look for solutions that acknowledge both patterns. Maybe you need routines, but they need to have built-in variety. Maybe you need to organize your environment, but the organizational system needs to be flexible enough to accommodate your changing interests and energy levels. For relationships, understanding AuDHD can help explain some behaviors that might otherwise seem contradictory or confusing. You might be someone who desperately wants close friendships, but finds social interaction draining. You might be incredibly empathetic and sensitive to others' emotions, but also struggle to read social cues or know how to respond appropriately. These aren't contradictions. They're the natural result of having both an autistic social processing style and ADHD's emotional intensity and impulsivity. In work and academic settings, recognizing your AuDHD profile can help you advocate for accommodations that address both sets of needs. You might need both the quiet, predictable environment that supports autistic focus and the flexibility and variety that prevents ADHD boredom. You might need both extra time to process information thoroughly and permission to move around or fidget to maintain attention. Perhaps most importantly, understanding AuDHD can help you be more compassionate with yourself. The internal experience of having two neurological patterns that sometimes work against each other can be genuinely difficult. It's okay to feel frustrated when your need for routine conflicts with your need for novelty, or when your desire for social connection conflicts with your social exhaustion. These are real challenges, not personal failings. Your brain isn't broken. It's running two sophisticated but different programs simultaneously. Sometimes they conflict, creating internal tension between your need for routine and your craving for novelty, between your desire for deep focus and your tendency toward distraction. Sometimes they amplify each other, creating more intense sensory experiences, stronger emotional responses, or more complex executive function challenges. And sometimes they complement each other in ways that create unique strengths: the ability to focus intensely on novel problems, to notice details others miss while still seeing big picture patterns, to bring both systematic thinking and creative flexibility to challenges. The key isn't choosing between your autism and your ADHD, or trying to suppress one in favor of the other. It's learning to work with both, understanding that the internal contradictions you experience aren't character flaws, but the natural result of a complex brain that processes the world through two different but equally valid neurological lenses.